Hey, what's up, Overtime fans? This is Mike Gilbert. And as you guys know, on these weekend shows, I like to hit you with the track. So everybody get ready. Here's Tool.
I want to see something really scary.
Attention. Do I have everybody's attention now?
God damn, what a fucking intro that was. Mike, you're muted. Mike, you're muted.
Sorry, my mic is muted. Yeah. Welcome back to Overtime, everybody. I'm Mike Gilbert. I'm here with JD Oliva. And I love starting these shows with with an old school track. And we hit some 46 and 2 by Tool. I did not tell JD that was coming. I just wanted to I wanted to see his reaction.
Oh, because he knows I'm a huge Tool fan, man.
Yeah. That's my favorite Tool song.
So. That's not my favorite Tool song, but I love that song. Like, Anemia was one of my favorite tracks when I was in high school. And like in my friend group, I was like the last guy who was still hanging on to heavy metal. And like I was the only dude that was listening to Tool. And like I this was like my stuff that I listened to like kind of on my own when I was trying to get my head right. And like to this day, man, you sit there and like Danny Carey's drums just kick in. There's just no drummer like Danny Carey in music right now. I still maintain he's the best modern rock drummer, period. And then Justin Chancellor on there playing the bass guitar, Adam Jones, the pride of Libertyville, Illinois, just those groove guitars, and Maynard James Keenan, just like one of the most unique, gifted frontmen in all of music. God, I love that band so much. Thank you, just made my night. I could talk about Tool forever.
Yeah, I've seen them twice in concert. Once in Vegas, once in San Francisco. In Vegas, I was not sober, but at San Francisco, I was in sobriety, and that was the first concert I saw after I gotten sober a long time ago. So Tool will always have a special place in my heart. But I love those guys. Love that band.
Art rock, man. Art rock. I could compare them like Pink Floyd played heavy metal, or King Crimson played heavy metal. Like it's just nothing, especially in that era, nothing like Tool to this day. Oh my God. Thank you.
Yeah. Great stuff. Everybody, send suggestions, by the way. I know for my Brace for Impact show this week, I'm gonna play a song for Lucha Doncic. He actually sent me a suggestion. So I just gotta get the song that he sent me. But it's a rapper called West Side Gun. He does a lot of rap songs about wrestlers. So I'm gonna play one of his tracks. So send me some suggestions, man, and I'll get them played on our weekend shows. Stuff that I can't play on YouTube, but we'll just do here for the Patreon, just something little additional for our Patreon community. So thanks everybody for being Patreon subscribers. It's been a couple weeks since JD and I have done an overtime together, but I have been on the Patreon the last couple of weekends doing my own stuff. So we're gonna keep the content machine rolling. So Vice, man, they started the Who Killed WCW series, and we got a chance to watch episode 1. And what did you think of the first show, man?
It was all right. Like, it was all right. Like, kind of like, I don't want to like boil this down because I think it made me think of Iron Claw a little bit. Now that being said, I thought the Iron Claw was a much better product, but it's like when you know the story, like you immediately have to cock an eyebrow to everything anybody says because you just sniff agendas. And like like with most Dark Side stuff, it's well produced, looks good, sounds good, but like I feel like it's almost like I'm going to McDonald's, right? Like smells fine, looks fine, it's a clean restaurant. I sit down, and it's still a McDonald's cheeseburger at the end of the day. And nothing I can do is going to change the fact that you're trying to serve me a shitty McDonald's cheeseburger.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of look at it differently. I know you're like a documentary guy, and I'm a very big documentary guy. And there's a few things that I expect out of my documentaries. One, am I going to learn something new? That's very important to me. I love learning new things. 2, are you going to entertain me? Because I think that is important to people. Like entertaining somebody in a documentary is kind of a lost art, and I think some do it much better than others. And And 3, am I going to get to relive some old memories, specifically from my childhood? And what I mean by that is like, okay, clearly I'm not watching World War II documentaries, despite what my airman would say, because I'm reliving old childhood memories. No, but I'm learning something, and I happen to enjoy those.
Vicious.
And yeah. But if I'm watching something from my childhood, yeah, I'm going to get to relive some of the old stories. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know, but at least at the very end, they will be somewhat entertaining. With this one, they didn't hit all of my expectations, but I did find it to be entertaining. And I did get to relive some childhood memories. So that's always fun. Unfortunately, I didn't get to learn anything new, but I did get to hear from new people that I've never heard from before. Specifically, Brad Siegel, I thought was pretty refreshing to have that guy on the show, because I've always heard for years that it was Brad Siegel and Jamie Kellner. They're the two guys that killed WCW. Brad Siegel always hated wrestling. He hated wrestling and yada yada. And then here he comes on to Who Killed WCW and admits that he hated wrestling.
He hates wrestling.
My favorite line was whenever he found out that TNT was coming to, or WCW was coming to TNT, and he was like, I just got done making this brand into like a well-respected brand, and now we're going to put stupid wrestling on it. I disagree with his opinion about wrestling, but I find the fact that he's just so matter of fact about it and unabashedly putting his opinion out there that he hates professional wrestling, I found it to be refreshing. I thought he was awesome.
I agree. I mean, what I like about talking to guys like this, and this is why I think Guy Evans did such a good job with the Nitro book, is it's nice talking to people, because again, we're too deep in the forest to see the trees sometimes. Like, we live, eat, and breathe pro wrestling, right? So it's nice to hear from people who really don't give a fuck about it, and it helps give you some perspective, right? Because we get wrapped up in the minutiae. And you talked a little bit earlier about like documentaries being entertaining, and their movies. People forget that about their documentary. This, speaking from a guy who has a degree, this is literally what my degree is in. It's in documentary filmmaking. Like, a documentary is not journalism, right? Yeah. The idea of a documentarian is to tell a story using real life, right? But you come at it with an agenda. You have a story to tell. The job of the documentarian is not to present truth. The job of the documentarian is to present a story. So I know that going in, right? My qualm is the stories that get told. That's where I'm like, so what, like, if the agenda is, are you doing propaganda? Or are you doing, are you in a quest for some sort of truth? So if you're doing propaganda stuff like Triumph of the Will, which is this documentary that was made by Leni Riefenstahl in 1936, she filmed the 1936 Olympics that were hosted in Berlin. And Hitler basically instructed her to make this film to glorify Germany and show the world why Germany is the best and why we do this stuff right. And then Jesse Owens kept winning gold medals and Hitler kept getting pissed off. But I mean, it's all, I mean, I guess. Is
that the documentary where they're filming Hitler like tweaking balls on amphetamines in the stands, like shaking back and forth and scratching his arms and stuff like that?
That would be the one.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen the movie, but I've seen that clip specifically has been passed around forever.
So it's a very well-made movie. She was so ahead of the time with what she could do with the camera, specifically with sports footage, right? It's a guy who's like really my major interest in sports documentary. And she was the first person to incorporate slow motion. Like, she had these amazing shots of divers and runners moving in slow motion. It's an incredible film. It truly is, but it's a piece of Nazi propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that was the job. That was her job, was to glorify the Reich, you know, and she did. Yeah. So, but I mean, like, you have to understand why you can say something is good and say, well, the agenda, pisses me off for X, and that's perfectly fine. Like, you need that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is, I don't know what the agenda is of the documentary yet, because I don't know that they're actually at the end of episode 4. It's a 4-part series, so we'll do this every week until it's over. I'm having trouble because I didn't know what the agenda of episode 2 was, and it was clearly just to set the table. Or I'm sorry, episode 1. It was it was really just establishing the characters, establishing Eric Bischoff as this guy that come over, like this this humble servant coming over from the AWA and reinventing WCW. He really did. He did a lot of innovative stuff, had a ton of great ideas, and I think that early, like a lot of those 1994 WCW on into whenever he left, he had a ton of great ideas during that time. Ultimately, obviously failed, but we do have to give the devil his due a little bit. He did bring over a bunch of great ideas, but they're establishing the characters, but they're not really like pointing the finger just yet. And I think maybe that's what the audience was wanting. They're wanting like everybody on camera in unison to say that Eric Bischoff killed WCW, when really, you're going to get a wide variety of opinions there. And I think the only guy that was willing to say that was Bret Hart. He was like very matter-of-factly about it, like say, yeah, it was Bischoff.
Bret don't care. And like Bret's the only guy who doesn't give a flying fuck about trying to stay in the WWE's good graces. Bret could care less. So here's my qualm with all this: is the vibe that I got off the show is it felt like the Eric Bischoff Reclamation project. Right now, I could be wrong. I could be at the end of the day, they are going to paint Bischoff as the guy who was responsible for it. But the fact that he's so directly involved with the production, and the fact that the Dark Side guys have slipped a little bit over the years as far as how they cover these things, and they're now part of the system. They're not guys that operate outside the system now. Like they're firmly entrenched in it.
So JD, Eric Bischoff had a podcast last week, or I think it was earlier this week. Might have been Monday. Guess who his two guests were?
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Halsey and
Brian Gewirtz. It was Brian Gewirtz and one of the Dark Side guys. I can't remember if it was Evan Husney or it was the other guy.
Yeah, I don't like it. So I mean, like, and this is the vibe. This is the vibe that you get off of it. And Eric has very much tried to defend himself as being the guy responsible for it, because quite frankly, he's the guy responsible for it. He killed WCW.
I think he's the main culprit. A lot of people contributed to it, but I think
sure.
Yeah, he's patient zero. It's kind of like, Ken Burns had that old quote about, how a lot of people in the South were trying to say that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. And he was like, a lot of things contributed to the Civil War, I'm sorry. But one thing caused it, and it was slavery. A lot of things contributed to the death of WCW, and one thing caused it. It was Eric Bischoff's mismanagement. Right. Mm-hmm. That was the initial, like the free fall without a parachute started on his watch, his lack of leadership, his lack of foresight, and essentially losing control of the company. It started with him, with all the people that he had hired, and they were losing tens of millions of dollars on his watch. And then of course, a bunch of bad decisions ultimately led to the death, but it was on his watch.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on this, because the company had been in free fall from its inception until Eric Bischoff comes in, and it still takes a couple years for it not to be in free fall. WCW was a money loser for all but 2 years of its existence.
Yeah,
all but 3 years of its existence. Excuse me. So, like, the fact that you have to give him credit for one, sticking to his plan, because he takes over in '93. And it's not until 96 that they start, turning things around. It took a long time. And like a lot of that was, I believe it was you who praised them for, and it was one of our text threads. You praised them for the Disney move, which saved them a lot of money, made for some really bad TV.
Yeah, and I thought it was a brilliant move, getting them off of the road. We actually talked about it. We didn't talk about WCW doing it on the podcast on the Mike and JD show, but we've been talking about TNA possibly doing that, kind of going back to their roots and going back to an Impact Zone type of setting, or Full Sail University. AEW moving Collision to Arlington, coming up with a residency for the next couple of months, and we're praising them. Well, not that he came up with the idea. Studio Wrestling has been around forever, but he had the foresight to take WCW off of the road because they're a money loser and move them to Disney MGM Studios, and the show looked great, well lit, always had a fresh audience. That part was great, but again, it also he could not manage it well enough because they were shooting, 5-6 times a day, doing months in advance, and it really had a negative impact on the overall storytelling of the show.
Yeah, the show sucked, right? Like worldwide, it worked. Like they filled their syndication. It really helps tell the fan base that syndicated WCW television didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And it was decisions like this that I think eventually did kill like syndicated wrestling in general, because because remember, back in the 80s, syndication was the prime. That's where everything happened. The one exception was WCW, right? I mean, the WCW show, World Championship Wrestling, which eventually morphed into WCW Saturday Night, right?
Yeah,
That was
well,
a cable
can you,
show. Sure.
JD, can you explain that real quick? Because I just got into an argument with somebody about this on Facebook, and I don't know why I engaged, because I'm above it. Actually, maybe I'm not above it.
Why are you fighting with wrestling fans on Facebook? You're beyond this.
I know. I'm 41 years old. What am I doing? Get a life, Gilbert. But can you just explain what WCW was, and then exactly what Ted Turner bought and turned it into WCW in 1988?
Okay, so when we say WCW, when we usually were saying, we're referring to the promotion of World Championship Wrestling. The World Championship Wrestling name carries over from the television show, which started off as Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1974. That was on WTCG television. Eventually, WTCG becomes WTBS, Turner Broadcasting System, right? And that was Ole's promotion, right? There have been other promotions. Paul Jones had ran stuff, and Ray and Ann Gunkel ran stuff. So there's always TV in Georgia wrestling, but eventually it's Ole's show that becomes that starts as Georgia Championship Wrestling and then becomes World Championship Wrestling. In the late 70s, it becomes the most popular wrestling show on cable, because cable is new and WTBS is a superstation. There was a handful of what they called superstations in the country that got to get broadcasting cable. We had one in Chicago, WGN. New York had WOR.
LA had KTLA.
KTLA. So we didn't get that in Chicago. So I actually didn't know that until you just said that.
Yeah.
So, but there was a handful of superstations that literally had their stuff broadcast across the country. Now, because of that, the territory system starts to crumble. People blame Vince. In reality, it's Turner that starts the end of the territory system, because so many people were able to watch World Championship Wrestling on TBS, and it changed its name to World Championship because people in Ohio started watching it. Specifically, Dayton, Ohio becomes the first place where these start to crack. They have a deal with the Tunnies up in Toronto. All of a sudden, things start to move and start to change. So the show is World Championship Wrestling. Vince, Black Saturday, buys the promotion, buys Georgia Championship Wrestling promotion, and takes, not because he wanted to run those towns, but because he wanted that TBS time slot. So the World Championship Wrestling TV show becomes a WWF TV show in 84. And they actually reverted the name back to Georgia Championship Wrestling, which is interesting. I've always thought that was an interesting move, that it became Georgia Championship Wrestling again, but it had the same exact intro. And then Vince sells that spot back to Crockett, and it becomes once again World Championship Wrestling. Funny part is they had the same exact intro for all three promotions. That famous intro. Yeah.
Did Vince not own the name World Championship Wrestling when he bought the time slot? Did he not own it?
I thought he did.
Because he bought Georgia Championship Wrestling, and I thought he owned. Maybe we have to do some research on that. Maybe for like next episode, we'll clarify. I could have swore he owned the name World Championship Wrestling, because Ole Anderson then starts Championship Wrestling from Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very very clever. And then they get on TBS, and then when Vince then sells to Crockett, that's when WCW, the World Championship Wrestling TV show, comes back. And then Crockett's got that show, and then Championship Wrestling from Georgia is still a thing for a little bit.
For just a little bit, then it pretty much gets absorbed into Crockett. Like Crockett bought it, and so what's interesting happening is, like, the show is called Georgia Championship Wrestling, but it still has the World Championship Wrestling intro. Like, it still says World Championship Wrestling on the thing. Weird. So at the time when Vince is on TBS, you also have Ole's shows in the mornings, right? The Championship Wrestling from Georgia. By the way, shitty shows. You also have Watts's UWF Mid-South, is also on TBS at the same time. So TBS has three different wrestling promotions at the same time going. What show won? What show outdrew? Watts is number one. When Vince wanted to get rid of it, Watts thought the spot was his. Crockett snuck it out from underneath him. And then, so that that's that whole thing that brings that into place. So the show continues through, right? Crockett buys the UWF, Mid-South Watts, and that becomes part of it. And then eventually the show, TBS, or Turner, I should say, buys Crockett, not the NWA, but Crockett. Yeah. And originally it was called Universal Wrestling Corporation in 89. They still NWA, we wrestle, and it was the Universal Wrestling Corporation. And then in 1990, they decided to rebrand the company WCW, World Championship Wrestling. They renamed the company, I should say, after the TV show. That is WCW. Yes. So that is the abbreviated history of how we got WCW as a name. What exactly were you fighting about?
I
specifically.
said that TNA outlasted WCW and
Oh yeah,
ECW. And I
100%.
said, twice. They've lasted twice as long as either one of those companies.
Mhm.
And technically, I'm correct because WCW wasn't established until you can say 1988, but 1990 is
Yeah.
like when the LLC WCW was created.
Mhm.
I didn't say it was on longer than the World Championship Wrestling TV show because that show was on for 20 years or whatever, 25 years. So on Saturday nights at 6:05, it was on for a long time, right?
Mhm.
So that was the argument. I was like trying to give the guy a history lesson.
Close.
He just wasn't having it. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, you're stupid. What am I doing? Why am I talking to this moron about the history of pro wrestling when clearly he has no idea what he's talking about? So I was trying to be matter of fact to defend my video. But anyway.
But here's the problem with that, and this is where I take up issue with stuff like this, is because WWE has taken control of the wrestling history narrative, and they tell their version of history, and oftentimes, like, they don't talk about that. Like they did. I did not see the Black Saturday episode. Did you see the Black Saturday episode?
I did, and I enjoyed it because that was the first time I had seen Gerald Briscoe kind of talk publicly and honestly about it.
How accurate were they? Like, were they pretty good, or were they giving you a WWE homogenized version of history?
I didn't see any connection to WWE whatsoever on that.
That's good. Okay.
I thought it was pretty good. Did they leave a lot of stuff out? Yeah, I mean it's a 45-minute show, and it really could have been a 40-hour documentary. Yeah,
for sure. Like I said, Ken Burns' History of Professional Wrestling documentary that exists in one of the alternate universes is a phenomenal thing. Unfortunately, the only guy that can make that documentary is no longer interested in doing those sorts of things.
So, unless you're a billionaire and you want to fit the bill on that one.
Yes. Yeah, I'll do that, by the way. If Tony Khan wants to pay me to do that, I'm more than happy to do that. Like, so that's my qualm, though, is like their version of history often becomes like the version of history. And that bothers me because, like, you get arguments like this. Like, I had an argument with the guy once. He's like, WCW didn't come up till 1990. And I showed him the picture of Vince standing in front of the WCW logo. And he said I created an AI.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, you're a fucking tool.
Yeah. Like at that point, the conversation just has to end at that. I was like, okay, you're not a serious person.
Yeah.
Speaking of not a serious person, a couple more notes on this WCW episode, or Who Killed WCW episode 1, and then we'll send it on home. So Eric Bischoff lie tracker. I only really tracked, I think, 2 specific lies that he spewed. If he had an opinion about something, that's just his opinion. I'm not gonna say he's lying about his opinion, right?
Okay.
So, but one thing specifically stuck out, and I think it's been covered on other podcasts, but I feel like if we didn't talk about it here, we'd be fools. Him saying that whenever he left AWA to go to WCW, at that point he had not ever heard of WCW. That is such bullshit. There is no possible way. Now, before he went to AWA and got hired by AWA, is it possible that he had never heard of WCW? Yeah, if he's not a wrestling fan, maybe he doesn't know. But he's working in the business he worked in AWA for 5 years. There was a connection, like talent jumped back and forth between Crockett and the AWA. Of course he knew what WCW was.
Can I be honest with you? I actually kind of believe Eric in this, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Here's why. He's a fucking idiot.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yep.
He's an idiot. Like, here's why I completely think Eric might be right.
Counterpoint, JD, you win.
Like, he doesn't pay attention to wrestling ever. Yeah. Like, he brought his big answer to everything was, well, what's Vince doing? We'll do that. Like, I believe that now I also think that he might not have known, because he did sign with WCW in 91. So by that point, they are WCW.
Yeah.
So the fact that he said, I don't know what WCW is, makes kind of sense, because WCW in itself really wasn't a thing till 1990, at which point they're struggling to keep the AWA alive. And nobody would have said in 1990, I'm jumping to WCW. They would have said, I'm going to the NWA, or I'm going to Crockett, or I'm going to Atlanta. So I can kind of believe in Eric's version of things, taking into consideration that he's a complete and total idiot who has a terrible memory. And I kind of believe that he I think he believes that he didn't know what WCW was. I don't think he's trying to massage a message here. I think he's just a fucking idiot.
Yeah, I see your point, and I accept that counterpoint there.
Thank you.
The other one, and I don't know that it's so much a lie. I wish we could get Sting's opinion on this, but he said, WCW 97 or Starrcade 97, which I've been saying since Starrcade or since WCW died, that Starrcade 1997 was like the first bullet in
100%.
into the death of WCW.
Mm-hmm.
Like they said, death of 1,000 paper cuts. That was, I feel like that was the first significant blow to WCW. They lost a ton of consumer confidence. The show had just gotten too wacky, way too out of hand, and the inmates are completely running the asylum at that point with Hulk Hogan refusing to do the job.
I hate
Sting,
that.
Right?
I hate that phrase, but keep going.
Okay, sorry. But
no.
you get what I'm saying. Like Hogan has way too much power at that point, and the whole Sting just didn't seem like he was with it. He starts saying, Sting came in, he didn't really seem like he was into it. He just didn't seem himself. Back in the day, he was talking about how Sting didn't have a tan. He didn't say it on this documentary, the tan thing, but he said Sting didn't really seem with it. Didn't seem like he was interested. Didn't seem like he was into it, and ultimately talked himself out of winning the match, going into it thinking that Hogan was screwing him, and then Hogan ended up screwing him. I found the beginning of that argument or beginning of what he was saying to be truthful or to be a lie, and then he ended up telling the truth by the end of it, saying that Sting came in there to thinking that Hogan was going to screw them, and with his body language, Hogan ended up screwing him with that whole thing. I think by the end of it, he told the truth.
No, I agree with you on that. I think here's why I don't like the phrase inmates running the asylum. That is so Frankie Kazarian just said this about AEW. And like this is the things that people say when they don't have any really good ideas and they want people to do things for them and they want work to be handed to them. These are things like anyone who's like super creative and appreciates their creative freedom and has like a boss or someone that tells you that allows you to express yourself creatively and to be involved in what you're doing. No one who appreciates those things will say, well, the inmates running the asylum. That's uncreative people who want everything handed to them and don't want to be told what to do. That's what they say. Now, that being said, Hulk Hogan has way too much power and authority in this company at this point. Eric Bischoff doesn't ever say no to anybody. People say the inmates run the asylum. That just means that no one's listening to what you have to say because you don't have any stroke. Right. That's the problem. Yeah. Hogan was a problem. The problem is that Eric Bischoff didn't curb enough to say, Hogan, no. Because like we've gone back and looked in history. George Scott was a terrible booker, except for large periods where he booked Crockett. And it turns out that he just let Flair and Mulligan do what they wanted, and they drew a lot of money. Is that the inmates running the asylum, or is that listening to your guys who know what they're doing and allowing themselves to create and express themselves? Right. It's inmates running the asylum when it doesn't work. When it does work, we're letting people create.
Well, it's inmates running the asylum when nobody respects the boss, and that's clearly what was happening with Eric Bischoff. So that was the context that I was using. Nobody respected Eric Bischoff.
No, I just hate that. I just hate that phrasing. I wanted to get on my soapbox.
That's all I meant. I mean, the same could be true for a football team, right? Like the players don't have any respect for the coach. They're going to go to practice when they want. Quarterback's going to call whatever plays. Like quarterback is going to call whatever plays. Like last year, Jameis Winston got a play from his coach of the New Orleans Saints, and then just didn't do the play as called. He ended up getting himself fired. But like that's all I meant about that is that Hogan, the NWO, Hall and Nash, Randy Savage, they all had way too much power, and they refused to do a lot of things. A big part of what killed WCW was them having too much power, them not going on the road and working house shows, them not appearing where they're supposed to be appearing, false advertising, and a complete loss of consumer confidence is what killed WCW.
No, and I agree. I just hate that phrase because it takes the idea that anybody who works for somebody, like if you have a job and your job is to be creative, clearly you're just crazy and like you're essentially in a prison. And like I hate that idiom because it totally devalues the people that work there. And I heard Frankie Kazarian say that, and I lost all respect for him because he just bitched. And he's in TNA. He's not doing anything interesting now either. So boo fucking who, Frankie. Sorry.
And I don't think Frankie knows who his boss is right now. because
Oh.
the boss they did have got fired, and then they brought in
Uh-huh.
2 new guys, and I doubt they have a relationship. So,
Yeah.
but
But
I
you're
mean,
right.
is it
You're
possible
spot on right.
that yeah,
Good.
is it possible that that there's a lot of talent in that locker room that don't respect Tony Khan?
Oh,
Yeah,
100%.
I would say,
100%.
yeah.
I think it's like that anywhere you go. There's a lot of people
Oh,
in
yeah.
every job who don't respect the dude in charge.
Yep.
Right. It's all a matter of, it's all a matter of how that guy handles it. Right. And I think that Tony
Yeah.
Khan needs to say know a lot more. I think getting rid of Punk was a good step in that direction, because like they did have a CM Hogan like figure in AEW, and it kind of was Punk. Right.
Yeah.
He was kind of telling people how things were going to go, and he was on the show. So, I mean, like, sure. That being said, Hogan completely tanked Sting. He completely tanked a 1.5-year long storyline because it benefited him.
And then you got to look at it from Bischoff's perspective, not to play devil's advocate with Bischoff, not to have his back a little bit. The whole reason why they're as successful as they are is because he was able to bring Hogan over. I mean, like Hogan was a boon to that. Like he totally revitalized that company and then the NWO, of course, that angle made them into the #1 company in the world. But without Hogan, that doesn't work.
That's bullshit. Here's why that's bullshit. That's true for the Bash at the Beach in 1996 or 94, excuse me. When Hogan comes in the Bash at the Beach 94, you get one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time. By the end of the year, the pay-per-views are exactly where they were before, and TV ratings are lower. So what success did they really get with Hulk Hogan? They got a little bit more mainstream.
They had that peak
publicity,
initially, but the NWO doesn't work as well without Hogan, I don't think.
No, I agree with that. No, that I agree with. The NWO
that's
works
what I was
better
meaning.
with Hulk Hogan. Yeah. But I mean, he gets this whole like, well, they're nothing without Hogan. And it's like, okay, that initial Hulk Hogan stuff peters out remarkably fast. Like they really did. The Hogan stuff really ostracizes the WCW fan base. And it very much reminds me kind of what we've seen in AEW over the last couple of years, where you bring in this influx of people from the other place who are famous in the other place, and it just doesn't work the same. You give the wrong people power, and then all of a sudden you're worse off than where you were before. So that's what happened in 94, 95. 1995 WCW is unwatchable until you get to Nitro. Right.
So,
and
some of the worst stuff that you'll ever watch in your life happened in 1995 WCW.
Oh, and WWF might be worse, to be honest. Pro wrestling in 1985 is just not good in the main two companies. It's just not good at all. So like, you got to understand. So Hogan is a big part of this. The problem with Hulk Hogan is he convinced everybody he was the reason. The draw is Sting. That's the biggest pay-per-view that WCW ever did. And the reason why it's because the people wanted to see Sting. They didn't. They wanted to see Sting beat Hogan. And they had
the perfect heel in Hogan, who was one of the great heels ever, I think.
He was.
And then they had the perfect babyface in Sting. And Hogan fucked it up.
Yep. But it's fine because Hulk Hogan is a remarkably selfish human being. And he wound up being just perfectly fine. See, Hogan doesn't give a fuck that he killed WCW. He'll say, well, it wasn't Vince's company, brother, and it didn't have the leadership, blah, blah, blah. And like, that is a guy that was never once looked in the mirror and said, boy, you know what? I'm a fucking problem. Like that guy is one of the most immature, irresponsible, narcissistic parasites that's ever befallen professional wrestling. Yeah, he was remarkably successful in his day. And there's never been a guy who's been over as Hulk Hogan. But at the same time, he killed WCW. He's a big he is like the cocaine that Eric Bischoff just wouldn't let go of. Like Eric Bischoff was like an addict for Hulk Hogan. Like he just keeps coming back to him and keeps coming back to him. And Dave even said in the show today that, you know, Eric believed that whoever controlled Hulk Hogan controlled the business, which just showed that he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. This is why I believe that Eric Bischoff's a fucking idiot.
Yeah, because at that point, you know, 1990, like after the Sting thing, I was completely out on Hulk Hogan. I really started to like in 1998, early 1998. Because in 97, I loved WWF 97, but I think I was probably a bigger fan of WCW 97.
I was 100%.
And then, but 1998 with the rise of Austin, even though they had lost Bret Hart, and I was like, I was so excited for Bret Hart to go to WCW, but with them screwing the 97 Starrcade finish, and then completely fumbling Bret Hart's intro, and completely fumbling the way that they were going to be booking Bret Hart, I had lost all confidence in WCW in early 1998. That doesn't mean I wasn't still watching it, but I became more of a fan of WWF in 1998 because they had The Rock and Stone Cold and Undertaker and Mankind and all these characters are starting to get hot and D-Generation X getting hot at the right time. And I saw this group of aging talents get misused and not want to do business and not show up for shows and doing all the crazy stuff that they were doing in 1998 in WCW. I was completely out after that.
No, I was same. For me, the emblematic problem in WCW, the moment I realized I was so deflated with the whole thing with Super Brawl and because that's my favorite story in wrestling is the Sting.
It's one of the great ever.
It's to this day, it's one of my favorite stories in wrestling. And like, I'll tell you when WCW truly broke my heart and when I was like sort of check out of the company is when Sting joins the NWO Wolfpack.
Yeah.
Watching Sting in that red and black, just to me, it felt like such a shit on the storytelling that they had spent at that point damn near 3 years on. The fact, I mean, this wasn't like to me, it's like, remember when in New Japan when they tried to get Goto to join Chaos after years of feuding with Goto, and Goto is like, fuck you guys, fuck you guys, fuck you guys, fuck you guys. And eventually Goto joins Chaos, and there's like, and he's never quite been the same since. But I mean, like, it took Goto a long time to like be into, because I think Gato kind of saw that. When Sting just joins the Wolfpack, I was like, fuck, dude, like you spent years like standing up against this and being like the solo guy. And it's just like, for me, it was such a, like, for me, character guy, like it just never made sense. It didn't work. He looked terrible. He looked like he had a giant sunburn with the red paint. I
hated the red face paint. And NWO Wolfpack was kind of like a hip hop style group, because they had, because I thought Conan was great with the Wolfpack.
Yeah, he was great.
Conan and Hall and Nash and with the Wolfpack, I thought that was pretty good. But then they added Sting, and I was like, not only are you making Sting
and Luger,
bad, I think you're dragging them down. And then Luger, I thought was the worst of them all, because he's wearing like Jinko jeans and like just like he's just so uncool. And they made him out like, and the thing about Luger was like, it was never that Luger was cool. It's just he was just awesome. Like that was the appeal to Lex Luger. And I think Luger is criminally underrated, to be honest with you. But by 1998, when he joins the Wolfpack, I thought he was toast at that point, even though 97 was a great year for him.
97, he's the second best babyface in professional wrestling behind Sting.
Yeah.
Like Luger in 97, like when he beats Hogan, right, for that, he has a very short reign with the WCW title. I think a lot of people forget about in 97.
A week.
Fans, it's a week, and just a Papa rating at the, and it worked. But the fans went crazy. Luger's so over at that point. Like that's like the best Lex Luger there was 97 Luger. It's definitely the peak of his career. It's downhill from there. Like, I don't know, man. Like the whole Wolfpack thing, like again, they just always stuck too many people in those things. Like if they just kept it to like Conan, Nash, and Hall and 6, or he was gone by then actually. It was just Conan, Nash, and Hall. It'd have been fine. But I mean, like Sting should just been Sting. They should just, and it's funny too, because like the Wolfpack doesn't last very long. By the end of the year, Sting's back in the black and white. Just he's pretty much directionless till 99.
Yeah. We could go on about this forever, but we'll save the rest of it for episode 2. I'm curious to see. I think in episode 2, and I have not seen any of the previews. I think in episode 1 they really went over Eric Bischoff's part in a lot of things. Because if you remember, by the end of like in 1999, Bischoff gets fired. And I think they'll cover that in episode 2. And that Kevin Nash starts to gain more power in 98, 99. And I think that Kevin Nash, they're going to start to give him a lot of the blame in 1999 or in episode 2. And Shadow Man is one of those guys that thinks that Kevin Nash deserves a lot of blame. So we'll cover that on the next episode of Who Killed WCW. But that's going to do it for us this time on Overtime, our Overtime series, Who Killed WCW. Thank you guys for being here. And until next time, mahalo.
I want to see something really scary.
Do I have everybody's attention now?